Wack 100 thought he was about to catch 50 Cent slipping and score some points, but instead, he and his entire crew nearly walked into a deadly situation. Today, we're breaking down how things almost went completely left. Wack 100's tension with 50 Cent really traces back to the game. At the time, Wack was managing Game, right in the middle of Game's ongoing beef with 50. That's what led Wack to move extra cautiously and aggressively. When 50 came out to the West Coast, with his deep connections in LA and his history running alongside Suge Knight and Death Row Records, Wack had serious influence in the streets. Back then, when Wack first crossed paths with Game, he was still closely tied to Suge, and Game genuinely feared the situation could turn violent. Word spread that some dudes connected to Wack had Game surrounded on the street, while he was in LA, ready to put hands on him. When Wack pulled up, the scene was tense, a whole block filled with people prepared to jump Game at any moment. At the same time, Game was already having problems with Suge Knight due to his deal with Dr. Dre. Rumors even claimed Suge once dragged Game off a stage and slapped him, humiliating him publicly. That drama spilled into the music too. On the track Game Over, Yuckmouth took shots at Game, questioning his street credibility and mocking the pressure he was under. Game never directly responded to Yuckmouth, but he did fire back at others, making it clear he wasn't backing down. Everyone knew Wack 100 was still rocking with Suge during this era, so when Wack showed up to the street, where Game was surrounded, Game thought his time was up. Suge even pulled up himself, making things feel even more dangerous, but in a rare twist, Wack stepped in and made sure the situation didn't explode. The crowd eventually cleared out, nobody got hurt, and instead of chaos, Wack stayed behind and talked things out with Game, ending what could have been a deadly moment in LA street history.
I get up there, pull in, sure enough, Game, 4-5 people. Behind Game's Billy, they had a whole street full of.
They connected, and about 5 months later, Wack started managing an artist named Stacey Adams. He wanted the Game to jump on a feature for him. At the time, Game's head of security was a dude from the bounty hunter Watts Bloods named Toots. Wack already knew Tooties, so he hit him up and set a meeting with Game. Wack pulled up to the studio, and Game straight reached into his own pocket, handed him 10,000, and did the feature for free. That moment is what kicked off Wack managing Game. Game even rapped about it later on the track, From Adam, saying Wack got his number, pulled up, and that was that. He broke it down like this. Wack walked into the booth while Game was recording, handed him 10 grand. Before he could even finish his sentence, Game didn't owe him anything, but real recognized real. From that point on, they were locked in, like two pit bulls. Cross one, and you had to deal with the other. Game and Wack got real close, and Wack started backing Game during his beef with 50 Cent. By the time Wack stepped in, 50 and Game had already been going at it for years. Things escalated fast and eventually spilled into the streets, leading to a shootout. 50 had already kicked Game out of G-Unit and was dissing him on the radio, and after the New York incident, the shots didn't stop. They just moved into the booth. Everybody knew 50 was a real street dude, who survived getting shot 9 times, but Wack still felt like he could check him if he came to the West Coast. Wack had connections all over LA, and one day he got a call from one of his homies, telling him exactly which hotel 50 was staying at.
We came to understanding, they less dispersed. I went and introduced myself to Game, shook his hand, he shook mine, we got on.
Wack pulled up to the hotel deep, rolling with like 15 guys, thinking he was about to catch 50 slipping. But reality hit fast. New York already knew how serious 50 was moving, and Wack was about to learn the hard way. He and his crew walked into the hotel bar, ready to put hands on 50. But the moment they stepped inside, everything changed. It became clear instantly that 50 could have ended the whole situation right there if he wanted to. Wack expected some security, sure, but not what he saw next. 50's security looked like a straight-up private army, bulletproof vests, guns, radios in their ears, moving like Navy SEALs. What Wack thought would be a quick confrontation suddenly felt like a suicide mission. Realizing how locked in and militant 50 was, Wack decided it wasn't worth getting himself and his entire crew wiped out. So instead of starting a fight, they quietly backed out while 50 just smiled at him. Wack knew if anything popped off that night, he wasn't making it out alive. After that, the next time he crossed paths with 50, he tried to squash the beef between him and the game. One night, 50 was inside a club that Game wanted to get into, but the club blocked Game because of the tension. Wack stepped in, spoke to the owner, and convinced him to let Game inside so he could finally talk things out with 50.
La Meridian, La Moran or some shit. That's SLS now on La Cienega, right by the Beverly Center. We thought we did. Somebody called us, told he was up there. I got up there. We came in.
How deep were you?
About 15.
Wack ended up chopping it up with 50 and let him know that Game wasn't looking for any drama. After hearing that, 50 told the club owner to let Game and his crew inside, and at first, everything stayed calm. Later that same night, 50 and Game both ended up at the same strip club, and that's when Game decided he wanted to speak to 50 face-to-face. Wack went to 50's head of security and told him Game wanted to have a conversation. Back then, 50's security was a feared figure known as Monster, low-key, barely seen, but respected and feared by everyone. Wack already had connections with Monster through people he knew on the East Coast, so he helped set up the meeting, right there in the middle of the club, making sure nothing went left. 50 and Game talked for about 15 minutes, and it looked like the issue was squashed. But just weeks later, the two were back to beefing on social media. Fortunately for Wack, 50 never sent Monster or anyone else after him. Monster stayed as 50's head of security for years, yet there's very little information about him. What people did know was simple. If 50 had a problem, Monster handled it. Unlike today's security guards who chase interviews and attention, Monster allegedly stayed in the shadows and really put in work. He was there strictly to protect 50, even going as far as covering his face at airports to avoid paparazzi. Monster wasn't afraid to get physical either. Around the same time 50 and Game crossed paths, Monster reportedly got into it with photographers in Copenhagen who were staking out 50's hotel. Thinking they were about to ambush 50 for pictures, the photographers were caught off guard when Monster walked out instead. Reports claim he grabbed one photographer by the throat, snatched his camera, and started deleting photos. The whole thing lasted seconds, but the photographer was injured badly enough to go straight to the hospital. Monster was always around to keep threats away from 50, but later rumors started circulating that the two fell out, and that it could turn deadly. One story claimed Monster felt underpaid despite risking his life for 50 and allegedly told him to get it back in blood after taking a meal from him. There's no proof behind that story though, and other sources say Monster simply retired down south and now lives quietly with his family. Despite staying low-key, Monster was once shouted out by 50 on Piggy Bank, where 50 made it clear Monster was someone not to be played with, and Monster wasn't the only feared figure around 50 back then. Another scary name in his circle was Maserati Fox, a guy known for surviving countless attempts on his life and always managing to make it out alive.
Gang was trying to get in and they was like, we can't let you in. Gang like, what you mean you can't let me in? Like 50 in there. So Gang called me, I come down there, I talk to the owner, and I'm like, yo, what's the problem? And like, Wack, 50 got a clause in the contract that says if we let Game in, we gotta pay him double the rate, so on and so forth.
Maserati Fox was a real street figure who also dabbled in rap. Through connections with 50 Cent and Prodigy, he landed a massive record deal rumored to be worth $1 million. But when the label started delaying the paperwork, Maserati lost his patience. He allegedly showed up to the label's building with nearly 100 goons, surrounding the place to pressure them into paying up. That move alone showed how unpredictable and dangerous he was. Around the same time, 50 Cent was deep in a serious beef with Jimmy Henchman, one of the most feared power players on the East Coast. Henchman was known as a real-life boogeyman, tied to major street crimes and even the infamous Tupac shooting in New York. Despite that reputation, 50 refused to back down. Things escalated when Tony Yayo and Lodi Mack allegedly attacked Jimmy Henchman's son. In retaliation, Henchman's crew tried to kill 50 after a video shoot but failed, so instead, They shot up Tony Yayo's mother's house. Not long after, Lodi Mack was murdered, and Jimmy Henchman was later sentenced to life in prison for ordering the hit. Before Henchman was locked up, Maserati Fox allegedly pulled a gun on him inside the Apollo Theater, which only added to his wild reputation. Tony Yayo later said Maserati was the type of guy who could turn anyone into a shooter and was always ready to crash out. That reckless mindset eventually led to tragedy. In 1998, Maserati and his crew were riding in a taxi when he spotted rivals he had beef with. He jumped out, argued with them, then returned to the cab furious. According to reports, he ordered his crew to open fire. Bullets went everywhere, and an innocent man named Curtis Scott was shot in the head and killed. Curtis's brother, Jamal Scott, ran outside after hearing the gunshots and found his brother dead in the street. Maserati spent the next 16 years in and out of jail and was allegedly shot at least 5 times during that period. 50 Cent repeatedly tried to help him leave the streets and focus on music, but Maserati couldn't stay out of trouble. Even when Maserati's stepdaughter was tragically killed in a bus shooting, 50 stepped in and paid for the funeral, still trying to look out for him. In 2014, Maserati was sitting in a car with friends when Jamal Scott finally caught up to him. Jamal allegedly walked up and opened fire into the vehicle. Maserati was hit multiple times, stumbled out of the car, collapsed in the street, and died on the spot, ending a cycle of violence that had been building for years. Around this era, 50 Cent's entire crew moved like a military unit. After signing with Dr. Dre, members of G Unit reportedly wore bulletproof vests and rode in armored vehicles because the threats were real. That energy followed 50 everywhere. Even when Suge Knight showed up to a 50 Cent video shoot with 30 goons, 50 calmly walked up and confronted him. Suge realized 50 wasn't afraid and quietly left. From street legends to industry power plays, 50 Cent survived beef with some of the most dangerous figures in both hip-hop and the streets, and almost always came out on top. And that's exactly why, even today, certain people think twice before trying to test him.